and welcome to Tea and Strumpets, a Regency romance review. I'm Zoe.
And I'm Kelsey.
And Kelsey, I've been feeling good and I wanted to share because I'm like so excited. I've kind of gotten back into reading. Like this last week has been such a good book week for me. And
excellent.
It's fun because I haven't found that much joy in the last couple of months with reading. Like I haven't just been feeling super motivated to do it. And like every time you get kind of in that groove again. It's like so exciting, you know?
It's funny because you say that and I kind of went through the same thing. Like I went on the Kindle store and I bought like 6 books like that I wanted to read. Julia Quinn's book just came out and like there's a bunch of other ones that have come out that I wanted to read anyway. And I just didn't have them on my Kindle and I was like, you know what? I'm going to buy all of them.
Yep.
And I'm just going to like make myself read. And so it's actually funny because I actually took a detour, read a completely different book, and then read the book we read today and like finished it in the nick of time.
Yay! Well, I mean, that's all that matters. But it's funny. I wonder if you read one of the same books that I did this week. Did you read the new Julia Quinn?
I just started it last night.
All right.
So like I'm only like not even 2 chapters. I'm like a chapter into it. I instead read, this one came out a while ago, but I'd been waiting for it. So I read The Bachelor by Sabrina Jeffries.
Oh, awesome. How'd you like it?
I liked it quite a bit. I like had forgotten quite a bit of the Duke Dynasty series in the meantime, I will say. So I was kind of like reading it and I was thinking to myself, I'm like, do I know this? Like, do I remember this happening? Did I read this? I was like, had to go on a quick like recap detour for a minute, but
so fun.
I did enjoy it and I cannot wait to read the next one.
Well, that's what it's all about. I will say that I did read the Julia Quinn one and without any spoilers, I just had a lovely time reading it. It was a really great day.
That's what I was looking for.
Yes.
Like that's what I'm looking for and it's actually funny because I saw that was coming out and that was actually probably what prompted
the buying spree,
like the buying spree, because I'm like, I'm gonna buy that one, and I was like, oh, this one I haven't bought this one yet. Yep. Oh, aren't there a bunch of others that came out that I need to buy? So I was like, I'm just gonna make my way through everything. It's gonna be great.
I will say, I think it is actually a really great one again for if you're not feeling like too heavy of a book. I think that fits that perfectly. It's really happy, and I laughed out loud a lot. So thanks, Julia.
Well, that's good. Yeah.
So good.
Perfect.
But today we're talking about another book, which also had some laughter moments in it for me.
It did. I had some good laugh out loud moments.
Yes.
I had a couple quick barks that happened.
Yeah.
Where I was like,
I totally did too. So the book we are talking about today is Band Sinister by KJ Charles.
Yes.
And KJ Charles is a new author to us again. So we do have some author facts this week, just her short bio. So her bio says, after 20 years in UK publishing, including a stint at Mills and Boon, KJ Charles is now a full-time writer. She lives in London with her husband, 2 kids, an out-of-control garden, and an increasingly murderous cat. KJ writes mostly historical romance, often with some fantasy or horror in there. Her paranormal romance, Spectred Isle, is a 2018 Rita nominee.
Excellent. And some book facts we have for this week is it is a standalone book. However, it is loosely connected with a few other standalones that her fans consider as part of the Jonathan verse. Interesting.
Yeah.
The book Jonathan, or The Struggle of Virtue, is a fictional book mentioned in some of KJ Charles's books. The book is first mentioned in Wanted, an author, and then referred to again in Unfit to Print, set about 70 years later. The book connects characters from the books Wanted, A Gentleman, and Band Sinister in what has become known as the Jonathan verse.
So I wanted to include that because when you start this book, I just really felt like I was missing something. I was like, is this not a standalone? Is this part of a series? Because there's such a like wild cast of characters, and I mean wild in like the best way. Like I really enjoyed them all so much. But there's just like kind of so much going on and I felt like I was missing something. And so I wasn't sure. And we'll talk more about that later. But I will say that for the synopsis, I did edit quite a bit of that out. And again, I'll also talk more on that after the synopsis, just so that we could get through the synopsis a little bit more focused on our love story. Although I really liked that part of the book. So it was heartbreaking for me to be like, I'm gonna edit this down. So anyhow.
That's okay, because our love story is the main interest today.
It is.
And it's a good love story.
It is.
Yes, and today we have a couple of tropes. So we have an enemies to lovers.
Like enemies. Like
yeah.
Montagues and Capulets, Hatfields and McCoys. Like, we're talking about family enemies, guys.
Yes. Whole family against whole family. And then we also have the virgin and the rake.
Yes, we do. We have a virgin. And our main characters are Guy Frisby and Sir Phillip Rookwood. So shall we get into it, Kelsey?
Let's do it. We open to a gruesome scene. Under the cover of darkness, Lord Darkdown is engaging in some pagan ceremony in his gardens, complete with flames and mystery. The torchlight flickers over the party of evildoers who can barely contain their glee, as a young lady clad in only her shift, bosom heaving, lays at the center of their villainous circle.
But this is not the setting for our book. This is, in fact, a passage from our hero's sister, Amanda's, new Gothic novel, which has been published and our hero has only now gotten to read. And Guy, our hero, is quite horrified at the subject matter, but even more horrified at how easily her muses could be recognized.
For Amanda has named her characters Sir Peter Falconwood, who she describes as fair-haired, scientifically minded, and Lord Darkdown, both members of a Hellfire Club. And their neighbor is Sir Phillip Rookwood, who is, quote, fair-haired, scientifically minded libertine in a Hellfire Club with the notorious rake Lord Corvin, and, quote, might possibly object to his caricature as a murdering devil worshipper.
But Amanda isn't worried. Of course, they will never read it, so Guy shouldn't worry about any sort of suing for libel happening. Plus, Amanda is publishing under a pseudonym, so they will be protected.
Guy isn't so assured. After all, there's been very bad blood between the Rookwoods and Frisbys for years. Montague and Capulet, like we said before. But there's not much he can do about it now. The book is published, and while he doesn't find it respectable, he certainly can't argue that it's a ripping good story.
Plus, Guy is immensely proud of Amanda for her work, and they are both ecstatic about the £10 she got for the publishing. But now she's thinking of the sequel and really wonders, like, what actually goes on at Sir Philip's parties. So couldn't they pay a call to their neighbor? After all, she reasons, quote, what happened really wasn't his fault any more than it was ours.
However, Guy is adamant that Amanda never set foot near the house. It doesn't matter that his brother was the one who ruined things. As it stands now, Rookwood and his parties are scandalous, and she mustn't be seen near them. Sir Philip himself is the black sheep of the town of Yarlcote. He rarely comes to town, and when he does, he keeps to himself and his parties in his manor. His club, which he and Corvin have coined the Murder, was the kind of thing that everyone whispered with loud speculation about. But honestly, what can a club called the Murder by its own host be about? Orgies. That's what they all speculate. Orgies. For all the guests are radicals and have scandalous reputations, so what else could it be?
2 days after their conversation, though, Amanda doesn't come home from her daily ride, but her horse does. Guy is quite worried and trying to find her when a footman arrives at his home to inform him that she has had a nasty fall on Sir Philip's property and she is being treated currently at the manor for a broken leg. Quote, Guy stared at the words. Broken leg, he repeated. His voice sounded odd. I fear so, sir, the servant said. Sir Philip and Mr. Raven found Miss Frisby in a field, I understand. But is she all right? No, sir, her leg is broken. That was my first laugh, for sure.
Yeah, that was a good one. No, her leg is broken. Didn't you read the note? And the break is so bad that the servant informs Guy that the doctor attending her insists she cannot be moved. Guy can't accept that information because any contact with the manor will ruin his sister. He begs their housekeeper to come for propriety's sake, but she refuses to go there. Like, it's so scandalous the housekeeper can't even go there.
Oof.
Guy knows he has to find a way to get Amanda home, and he races to her side.
When Guy arrives, he is met by Sir Philip and a black man, the first he's ever seen not in a photograph. who says to Sir Philip, "Here you go, Phil. Outraged brother. Have fun." Sir Philip immediately inquires if Guy has brought a woman to attend Amanda, and when he answers in the negative, Philip starts railing. As there isn't a single female in the household, Guy shall have to take her home tonight if they cannot find a suitable chaperone. Guy is quite amenable to this, so they go to chat with the doctor.
But it seems that the bone was broken extremely badly, a compound fracture of the femur that was quite near her artery. Dr. Martello tells them. Moving her at all could kill her. In fact, disturbing her at all so that she moves too much could kill her. Can they find a skilled nurse to help him in this small town? He requests that Frisby summon the town's doctor to see about getting a nurse and sets about giving other orders for the night.
But both Philip and Guy protest because they want to move Amanda now, and the doctor is incredulous. Perhaps in a fortnight at the earliest, for any time before that, and they might surely kill her. He makes it clear that if it's her reputation or her life, that they should choose her life. And come on, get a woman in here and you can save her reputation.
Guy and Philip are both equally unhappy about this predicament. Neither one wants to be in the other's presence, let alone stuck in the same house for at least a fortnight. And they sling sarcastic barbs back and forth a bit while they try to figure out another solution. Quote, "Can you send for her maid?" "She wouldn't set foot in this house," Guy said. It was a statement of fact, not intended as an insult, but when he saw Rookwood's brownish brows shoot up, he realized how it had sounded. He opened his mouth to stammer out an apology, but Rookwood got in first. "I do beg your pardon, Mr. Frisby. Had I known Miss Frisby intended to trespass on my land and then colonize my house for an infirmary, I should have conducted myself differently. Had my father known your brother's intent to trespass on his land, I dare say we should have all conducted ourselves differently for the last few years," Guy said furiously. "But we all have to live with the consequences of his actions, don't we?"
Oof, so we still don't quite know what's happened between the Frisbys, but we know it has something to do with Philip's brother and Guy's father, maybe? We'll see. So the other house guests at Rookwood Hall are also not particularly pleased with the arrival of the interlopers because they come here for privacy, to have a space where they can be themselves. Quote, "They were here for comfort and safety, to think and talk without constraint, to touch as they chose or sleep in the same bed without worrying about it. That was what the murder offered. It was a rare privilege for some of them, for all of them really except Corvin, who could afford safety. And Philip was furious that the Frisbys had arrived to ruin it." He also fits the last piece of the puzzle into place for his friends, the full story of the family rivalry. It turns out that Philip's brother had run away with the Frisbys' mother. So Amanda being the daughter has extreme implications of ruination by the hand of another Rookwood. The gossip alone would run rampant, saying that the brother has ruined the daughter.
That's a sticky wicket.
It sure is.
But while the guests are a bit disappointed, the house is big enough and they all wish to stay. We have John Raven, an artist, David Martello, the doctor, Lord Corvin, a viscount, Harry and Sheridan, a couple of geologists, and George, a composer, and Ned, a violinist. Eventually, the town doctor arrives and gets into a huge row with Dr. Martello. Dr. Martello has some radical thoughts about medicine, but more than that, he looks ethnic. In fact, he's Jewish. And the town doctor insists that Amanda must be moved tonight for propriety.
Philip can see that Guy is torn and finally jumps into the fray. Quote, "Mr. Frisby," Philip said, cursing himself with every word, "you will do as you wish, but let me say 3 things to you. First, Dr. Martello is an excellent and highly experienced man. If I had a sister, I would put her in his hands without hesitation. Second, I quite understand your reluctance to accept my hospitality, but I give you my word as a gentleman that your sister will be treated with the utmost care and respect by me, my friends, and the staff as she remains here." "That's 2 things, Frisby said. His voice cracked. "Yes. The third is that I hope you will not allow the idle words of," he flicked a glance at the doctor, "petty, malicious busybodies and spiteful gossips to influence your decision. Miss Frisby has suffered a severe injury, and Dr. Martello advises she should be moved as little as possible. You might well consider any other concerns to be trivial until she has made a recovery."
But that isn't the end of it. Quote, "I beg your pardon," Dr. Bewdley said, swelling. Miss Frisby's reputation is not trivial. Reputation is a woman's crowning jewel, her greatest possession, and I will not stand by to see it tarnished. I think her life is a greater possession than her reputation. Frisby's voice shook slightly.
Oof, yeah, it is. And finally, Frisby gets the town doctor to admit that there is a risk in moving her, and so he decides to keep her at Rookwood Hall for the time being. Dr. Bewdley is so petty that he refuses to send a nurse to attend her.
Amanda descends into fever the first night and is in a bad way. Dr. Bewdley is called back out because Guy doesn't know what to do, and this descends into a furious argument about bloodletting, and Philip has to intervene again, and kick them out of the sick room to fight it out. He insists that Guy eat something and get some rest once he's decided which doctor he can trust and that he'll see that Amanda is cared for. So Guy eventually decides to go with Martello, and the servants have secured a woman to come attend Amanda by the next afternoon.
So Guy finally gets some sleep, and Amanda's fever continues to rage for 4 days. Things get very dire for a while, and this casts a bit of a pall over the house guests, even though they are not visiting Amanda nor partaking in her care. However, eventually she pulls through, and once she's cognizant enough, she is delighted to discover where she is. And she is also delighted to discover that her copy of Darkdown has arrived.
And once Guy realizes that Amanda is out of the woods for now, he finally gets some real decent rest. He awakens from a long, deep slumber late in the day, dresses, walks out of a room, and promptly gets lost. Quote, "It wasn't entirely his fault. The old Jacobean house was a maze. Getting from his remote bedroom to the main stair involved 4 turnings, and he had no recollection of the last few days beyond the constant blurring hum of panic. Nevertheless, he'd been up and down to and from this room multiple times. He ought to have known the way, but he hadn't actually paid attention to his feet in the glow of relief. He'd somehow taken the wrong, dark, narrow corridor, and now he had no idea where he was."
Luckily, this is a house and not a seedy London neighborhood, so Guy isn't worried. In fact, soon he hears voices and heads towards that to ask for help. But what he finds when he pokes his head into the room is nothing like he's ever seen before.
He has stumbled into a tryst between Phillip and Lord Corvin. They're exchanging body talk, kisses, teasing, adoring words. Before they go further, Guy backs away and tries to process what he saw. He wasn't entirely ignorant. After all, he is a scholar of Latin and Greek. But he had just reconciled that the murder's reputation was nonsense. But this was depravity, wasn't it? Except they seemed so tender. Hadn't Corvin said, quote, "My lovely, I adore you." Guy wanted to leave the house. He wanted to wipe it all from his mind. He wanted not to be aware of the uncomfortable, squirmy feeling in his gut, and the heat in his face, and the fact that he hadn't walked away at once, or raised the roof in moral outrage. The fact that he'd been momentarily transfixed.
He finally makes his way downstairs to find Amanda reading from Darkdown to one of the geologists. He goes from shock to shock again, because what if Phillip and Corvin hear of this book? But Mr. Street is transfixed and must know what comes next. Amanda ends up loaning him the book. And that's how the murderer learns of Darkdown.
Phillip himself soon runs into Guy and immediately notices something is amiss when Guy can't look him in the eye. He corners him into a walk, and the two take off as Guy can't find a way out. To break the ice, Phillip talks more about his brother and his own family history. Turns out that he is a bastard, never knew his brother, and had never been to Rookwood Hall before his brother died. His father had hated him, and he'd never truly been accepted in the society because of it, which is why he didn't care what the ton thought. He also felt that Rookwood Hall and everything in it really wasn't his. They also discuss what it was like for Guy and Amanda to lose their mother and their father's decline afterwards. Guy confesses that it hadn't been wonderful before she left, that all he could remember was fighting. So perhaps it wouldn't have been better if she had stayed.
However, with this deep conversation and with Guy's frayed nerves, eventually one comment unnerves him and he shouts at Phillip and storms off. It doesn't take him long to cool off and realize that he was in the wrong for exploding like that. Quote, And Rookwood had let Guy and Amanda ruin his party, and he'd apologized for his brother, and he'd even offered to pay the bills that had been nibbling at the edges of Guy's tenuous calm. And in return, Guy had taken the first opportunity to shout at him for no reason except that his nerves were red raw, and he couldn't stop picturing Corvin on the couch and Rookwood smiling down at him.
Eventually, though, Philip appears and insists on apologizing himself for rattling Guy, and insists he join them for dinner. Guy can't say no, but his nerves continue to fray more because he worries that somehow Philip will know that Guy saw him and Corvin. The dinner ends up being fascinating, as he really gets to know what the murder is about and all the other guests. Conversation is heated and challenging and wide-ranging. The geologists insist the Earth is older than the Bible, and they show him fossils as evidence. All of this challenges his knowledge, but he can't refute it completely, and becomes very pensive. The fossil had been quite overwhelming. Also, they're atheists, and Guy doesn't even know what to think about that. And they all believe in women's rights. In fact, dinner can be adequately summed up by Guy's thoughts. Quote, Guy's jaw dropped. He wasn't quite sure if atheism was legal. It certainly wasn't acceptable by decent company. He'd never met a self-confessed atheist in his life until this bizarre sojourn. He'd also never met a black man, a Jew, or a geologist. Or a Viscount, come to that. He wasn't sure exactly how his quiet rural existence had brought him to this point, but Amanda would be wringing every detail out of him for months.
By the end of dinner, he has become quite pensive, sipping wine and thinking, quote, it was beyond argument for Guy. He couldn't begin to formulate answers to questions he'd never even considered asking. He also stares a lot at Philip throughout the meal, and Philip notices.
Corvin notices the gazing and offers Philip advice. Not to go after unknowns. And here's where things get more interesting. We learn that Corvin and Raven and Philip have been friends and lovers since childhood. They entertain each other, but there is no romantic love between them. But there is a very strong bond.
The next day, Darkdown has circulated and the murder has realized the inspiration for the characters. While they are all filled with glee, Guy, once he realizes, is filled with dread. Corvin is making threats, but those who know him know that he is absolutely delighted with being the inspiration for the villain in the book. But all that Guy can absorb is that they are going to use Corvin's connections to find out who the author is, and he is shook.
And while he's in that state, Philip invites him to watch John Raven paint his portrait, and it turns out to be in the same parlor where he had seen Philip and Corvin. So Guy tries not to have a total meltdown while Philip is seated, and the pair stare at each other, and finally, when Guy can't stop staring at the couch, Philip puts all the pieces of the puzzle together and knows that Guy knows. So later, he insists they talk and walk, and he doesn't mince words. Quote, right, not to put too fine a point upon it, Frisby. I take it you saw something you didn't intend to. That's not a complaint, he added. Entirely my fault. I'm not used to bothering with discretion here. But since you did, I feel we should both know where we stand.
And while it's a very difficult conversation, on their walk, Philip coaxes Guy to talk about it. They discuss laws and morality and their family's infidelities. Guy has a hard time wrapping his head around things at first, but Philip is gently firm. Quote, Well then, there's a right and a wrong. Yes, there is. In my view, what's right is that one's partner should be willing. If people freely choose to take their pleasure together, where is the wrong? Society would fall apart. Instead of being mortared with misery, adultery, and hypocrisy, people already act precisely as they please, Guy. The only question is whether we all have to keep up the pretense they don't.
But they also talk of lighter things, and there's some light flirting. But one interesting fact is that Philip admits that the name for the murder comes not from nefarious deeds, but from birds. You see, Philip Rookwood, John Raven, and Lord Corvin from Corvus, or crow, and rooks and ravens and crows are from the same family. They're literally a murder of crows, guys. That's why they call themselves the murder. It's a pun. And while a lot has been said, a lot remains unsaid. For Guy has had enough and finally has to take his leave.
Meanwhile, Amanda is recovering and enjoying her time with the house guests immensely. They are all delightful and thrilling, and she is absorbing it all with gusto.
The conversation isn't put on hold for long, though, because the next day Philip corners Guy into another walk, and on their way to a famous town tree up on a hill, some heartfelt conversation occurs. Guy admits that Amanda is his world, and that she's number one forever, as he's all she has. She was ruined in her one and only season, and now they're beholden to the aunt who pays for their livelihood. And one of her conditions of continued payment is that they stay in Yarlcote, as her own 3 daughters were coming out and couldn't be tainted by Amanda.
And then they discuss what Guy saw. Really discuss it. All the moral and legal and philosophical ambiguities surrounding it, the types of relationship that he has with John and Corvin, physical, not emotional, and then Philip goes for it when the conversation opens the way. Quote, "Let me be frank. I find you intriguing and extremely appealing and delightful company and very much a man who deserves more pleasure in his life. If you'd like to take that pleasure with me, I'd be honored. If you aren't so minded, don't take offense at the offer, and I shan't at the refusal. And if you decide you'd prefer Corvin, for example, I shall bow out like a gentleman, although I shall probably kick him in the shins at some point from pure envy." Guy's eyes were huge, catching the green of the lush lands around them. Philip smiled into them. "You are entirely lovely, and I'd like to prove that to you, but only if you wish. And now we are going to walk on, and you can tell me what you think when you've found out what it is." Oh, such a nice thing to say.
I have thoughts. I'm going to share them later.
I know.
But I have a lot of them.
I know.
Okay. Guy has to wrestle with his morals and his feelings and all these liberal beliefs that he's only recently discovered. They reach the tree and they discuss it more. And he thinks more. Quote, "It might prove calamitous. He could imagine 1,000 ways in which it would, but he'd stayed and listened to the murder speak as they chose for hours, and it had felt as though he'd been in a box without even knowing it, and someone had taken a crowbar and pried off the top. Guy had blinked at first and shied away from the light as too painful. Now he felt the urge to stretch."
So at the end of their conversation, he nods his ascension, and something has begun. When they return to the estate, Guy is a ball of nerves. But Philip is patient and gentle and assures him that they won't do anything he isn't comfortable with. All he has to do is say stop, and Philip will stop. This calms Guy enough to get them into the house and up to a sitting room.
And there they have a lesson in consent, pleasure, and passion that starts with a kiss and continues to hand stuff, where both parties get to pleasure the other for our first encounter. But with the pleasure of youth and perhaps the loss of his virginity, Guy is ready again and gets to learn what Philip's mouth feels like on him as well.
And life continues quite merrily after this first encounter, where Guy starts to finally feel like a part of the party and relaxes into the company. Amanda is still having a lovely time with all the guests when they come to visit her. The only darkness is dark down, as Corvin continues to shout about slander and libel, which Guy takes quite seriously, not realizing that this kind of notoriety is exactly what Corvin revels in.
And with the kind of day that Guy has had, he's on edge and terrified for Amanda, and terrified that he holds the truth of the author. So he realizes he has one recourse. He can take the blame and say that he is the author. Amanda and he get into a row about it, and because it is her book, and she wants to take the credit for it. God, Guy, you can't take it away from her.
Seriously.
She worked hard on it.
But as Amanda is bedridden, Guy is able to apologize for, quote, writing Dark Down to Philip before she can stop him. But only just before she can stop him, because she threatens to pull herself out of bed, and the doctor insists that Guy and Philip join them now in the sick room, where Amanda takes the credit she is due. So she lets Philip know that she is the author. And finally, everything can be explained and ironed out, and the Frisbys learn that Corvin is actually absolutely delighted with the book, and that Philip is also totally fine with it.
And with that, Philip drags Guy up the stairs for a discussion and a kiss, and they part with a greater understanding of the other. They move into encounter number 2 that day, which is a continued education of all the things they could do to each other. One day, when Guy feels comfortable about it, but for now, he has to learn to voice what he wants and likes, which is hard for him, as he's only just allowed himself to want. Quote, "It's not that I don't trust you, it's just, I've spent my whole life not saying anything to anyone, barely to myself in my own head, and now you want me to say it all out loud? And I can't." Philip cocked his head. Guy had a sudden fear he would reveal irritation or impatience when he spoke, but he sounded as calm as ever. "Actually, dear heart, you just have. I asked you for something, and you've told me you don't want to do it. That's every bit as important as what you want to do."
The next week passes like a dream. Amanda improves and is transferred to a chair, and Guy and Philip continue their affair blissfully. There is some description of their continued affair, so perhaps we can call this encounter 2.5. However, the planned time at Rookwood Hall is coming to an end, which will force some decisions and some conversations. Philip will remain until Amanda can leave, but the other guests begin to leave as needed. Philip, though, is realizing that it will actually be hard to leave and go back to London and continue his life without Guy. There is just something very different and special about their relationship, and he's not sure what to do about it. Oh, also, Dr. Martello is kind of in love with Amanda, and he is also not sure what to do about it.
Yes, because he's a good man and has a problem with the whole he's her doctor, she's his patient, there's a line he can't cross. Mm-hmm. Philip decides to tell Guy that he's fallen in love with him. And could Guy possibly come to London with him? Guy is stunned and wishful, but there's Amanda and their aunt and so many complications, namely the lack of funds. So for now, visits to Rookwood Hall would be all they have.
The next week is also blissful, and encounter number 3 is even more adventurous than the first 2.
However, then there is a plot twist.
While Philip and Guy are in the midst of encounter number 4, a carriage arrives. Somehow their aunt has heard that the Frisbys are at Rookwood Hall, and now she and her husband have come to extricate them. They simply won't take no for an answer. Anyone learning that the Frisbys were even here, my word, that could risk the family's reputation.
And as the Frisbys are financially tied to her, they do return to their home, much to everyone's dismay, except their aunt, who stays with them for a while to solve things. Her solution is to marry Amanda to a curate who is dismal, and Amanda is horrified.
However, she imagines that she can get a £10 advance for book 2 of Darktown, plus the money she had for the first. So with that money, perhaps they could move and pay their own way for a year while Guy finds work.
It's also important to note that they're both lovesick. Amanda over Martello and Guy over Philip, and they do discuss the amours with each other, and both are understanding of the other, which is just fabulous.
It is.
But Amanda's fabulous.
Yes, she is. After they tell their aunt that they won't follow her orders and will be striking out on their own, visitors arrive. It's Philip, and he has an important letter for Miss Frisby. However, once he hears of the curate and the proposal, he hurries back outside to bring in Dr. Martello.
The letter turns out to be a better offer for her book. £40. Raven had helped negotiate for her, but sends word she should hold out for 60. Oh, and Dr. Martello also has a very important question for her. Would she like to marry him? Oh, yes. Amanda would. In fact, she doesn't even let him ask the question. And while he sees to her aunt, who is having palpitations over the whole evening, Philip and Guy are able to slip out to the garden to discuss their future.
With Amanda settled with Martello, that leaves Guy more free than before. And would he like to be Philip's man of business? That way they can travel together and be together? Well, Guy has no idea if he'll be good at it, but he's excited to try. And they exchange I love yous in the garden and have a moment together before heading back inside. Quote, Philip shut his eyes, something in his face relaxing. Thank you, beloved. Thank you. Am I still imagining you kneeling down? I could very well be kneeling. Could we imagine that you stood up and kissed me? Thoroughly, Philip said, and passionately, with one hand on your wonderful arse and the other in your hair, bending you backwards and ravishing your mouth until you have no choice at all but to say, "Yes, please, Philip. I hope." "Yes," Guy said. "Yes, please, Philip. I'd love to be with you, and I'd like to imagine I'm kissing you back as hard as you've ever kissed me." "I truly am. Good. Might I get back on my imaginary knees? I have work to do there." They were simply standing in a vegetable garden, not even touching, looking at one another, and Guy could feel Philip's touch all over his skin.
And that evening, their aunt leaves, and the two happy couples have a night together. And Philip and Guy have a passionate encounter number 5. And so starts their happy ending.
Aww.
So cute.
It is cute and fun and different, and I just can't wait to talk about this book. So
I know. I'm so ready.
So shall we adjourn to the parlor?
We shall.
So today we have something very special to announce. I know we normally talk about what book we're reading at the end of the show, but we're going to talk about it here because next week we're not really reading a book per se, but we are, of course, talking about one, and we're talking about it with the author. We've got an interview. So next Thursday, May 7th, we will be chatting with Scarlett Peckham about her fabulous new release, The Raycast.
Oh, yeah, baby.
Oh, my gosh. And so The Raycast came out this week. It came out 2 days ago from when this episode dropped. It is available as of April 28th. So
y'all need to get it.
Yes. I highly recommend this book. I do know it's a bit darker. You know, it's not the light and fluffy. I will say that. I'll let y'all know that.
Yes,
but like,
absolutely.
It makes my heart sing. I think this book is so cool. And we're going to talk about it next week. So I'm not going to talk too much.
Yes, we are. We're not going to talk more about it.
But buy it, read it, because we are going to talk about the book quite a bit in the interview. And it's, guys, we've already recorded it. It's fascinating. And you all are going to want to hear what she has to say. It's so great. So go get the book. It's on sale now. Read it this weekend and come back next week ready to hear all about how it came to be.
And Scarlett is offering one of our U.S. listeners a chance to win a signed copy and some other awesome goodies from her. If you'd like to enter to win, all you'll have to do is sign up for our email list. Our subscribers will also get some additional material that is not on the podcast from Scarlett. So head on over to bit.ly/strumpetsignup to subscribe.
And if you're already a subscriber, please check your inbox to opt in for the giveaway, because I know not everybody, wants to be part of the giveaway, or maybe you aren't a U.S. resident and we're sorry it's just for U.S. residents, but given the times, that's just the way things are. And we are going to announce the winner on Monday, May 11th. So you guys have a little bit over a week to sign up and enter.
Yes, but you should definitely buy the book and then get the signed copy.
Yeah.
Because it's so fabulous. And you need to read it by next week anyway. So
yes.
Get to it, y'all.
Yes. And come back next week to hear all about it. I'm so excited to share this interview with you all. I'm so excited.
We are also looking for book recommendations. We love hearing from our listeners. So if you have a recommendation that we can share in our parlor, reach out to us. Let us know through our email, romancepod@gmail.com.
And if you'd like to find us on social media, you can find us on Instagram at TNStrumpets, Twitter at TNStrumpets, Facebook /TNStrumpets, Pinterest the same, and YouTube by searching our name. And also take a look at our YouTube channel coming up, because as I mentioned last week, we have some interviews with romance authors that are not Tea and Strumpets related, but I've partnered with a local librarian and we're doing some romance chats. And so those romance chats are probably going to be up on our YouTube sometime after the actual chat occurs. And those are going to be every Saturday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern on Facebook Live for the next 6 weeks. So there's a lot of really cool chats.
Busy.
I know, right? Because we don't, we're sitting at home. So obviously that means we're doing nothing, right? It doesn't mean that. That's a joke. We're all very busy. I get that. But we're really excited to bring that to you. So you can find out more about that on YouTube and our website.
Okay, now let's talk about Band Sinister.
Let's do it. So I just wanted to preface this discussion by saying I took a few more liberties than I ever had with the synopsis here. And I felt really bad about that. I kind of mentioned it at the top of the show, but normally we try to be as kind of stick to the book as possible. We want to be true to what the author wrote. But at the same time, sometimes that gets us a little bit in a hole where these get really long because books have this fantastic way of putting in information throughout, and for when you're summing it up, but still want to have a total synopsis, not just the back of a book blurb. Sometimes to find out half the information here and then have a scene and then half the information, it just doesn't flow. And then that makes our synopsis really long. So in an effort to kind of tighten that up a little bit, I took some liberties. And so some of the facts, finding out that, Philip was a bastard, or when exactly those sorts of things were a little earlier in the book, or a little earlier in the synopsis than it actually happened in the book. But I just felt like that was a better way to do it for this. So I just feel weird because I've never done that before where
Yes, but I think that we're trying this new thing, guys.
Yeah.
And we would like your input. If you hate it, tell us that. Send us an email, though. Don't rate us like that. Email us, tell us what you think, because yes, our synopses do get quite long and we want to keep you guys entertained, but we want to also give you our very signature good detail and good quotes because we love sharing those things. And the thing is, these whole books could be one massive quote.
Oh, seriously.
But we're not a podcast that read. We're not an audiobook. We're a podcast. So we got to shorten that down.
The other thing I wanted to mention is, again, there was so much more nuance in the book. The house guests, it felt like each of them had their own book. They felt like they all had their own backstory.
I needed way more information.
And they were so interesting. I would have read a book about every single one. They were so diverse. And so that was part of when I first started reading the book, I got very confused because they felt so developed. I felt like I was missing information about them. You know what I mean?
Yes, I felt like I was just playing. I honestly, I told my husband this because I was trying to explain it to him because I had tried reading it, and granted, I was tired when I started the book. Yeah. But I was tired and I was reading it and I told him, I just was like, I don't know about this book, man. I'm only a couple chapters in and it's been pure chaos.
Yeah.
Because there's just so much going on. There's so many different people and there's so many different characters.
And who's sleeping with who and what's their sexual preference and what's their race and what's their gender.
And I was so confused and I just was the whole beginning of this book was just chaos for me.
Yes.
But then I got past the chaos. I went to bed, woke up the next morning, started the book again.
Yep.
Not from the beginning, but picked up where I had left off the night before. And then I moved into this brilliant relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
With the most amazingly honest conversation, Zoe. I was almost where's the drama? This is a romance novel after all. But at the same time, too, my heart was so happy.
Yeah.
Because just and Philip even says it. He's I'm sorry, I have a tendency to be super frank with people.
Yep, he does. He says, let me be frank. He says it all over. It's so good.
And he's just so good though, because he really does. He gives you his background. He tells you what he thinks. And then he has these beautiful moments that we even said, it's just you're allowed to say no. You're allowed to say, I don't want this. Mm-hmm. And I will just suck it up and I will take the refusal and I won't hold it against you. You don't have to worry about Amanda being thrown out of the house. Yeah. I can take it like a man. This is about what you and you want. And I would like to be a part of your story. But if you don't want me to, that's okay. And I was oh my God, Yeah.
Yeah. Consent is really sexy, guys.
Oh my God. Yes.
But it can't, like, it didn't feel contrived. And what was so interesting to me about it was, you know, here it is in this male-male relationship. And also one of them is a virgin, but he's not just a virgin. He's like never allowed himself to think about his desires and never really allowed himself to think that he would want a man. He didn't even, it seems to me like he really kind of tamped everything down, and his whole life was about other people and not about himself. And so I
100%.
think that the way that she handled that was spectacular, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because Corvin tries to tell Philip, like, don't get into this, but then he's like, he also offers advice, you know, at times of like, well, you know, be careful, but he's never like a dick about it. And they're never like, you know, you're gonna ruin everything. They're just like, you know, like, we really shouldn't with innocence and with people who, you know, are unknowns, right? But like, but Philip does such a good job, and he read Guy correctly. Like,
he did. And I think that's so interesting because like, there were moments where like Guy frustrated me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'll talk about that in a bit. But I just loved, like, you really saw the growth. You saw the growth helped along by Philip. And the thing is, like, that quote you put in there about Guy, like, being in a box and, like, someone just prying off the lid. Like, this is a man who, you know, I'm assuming based on, like, the math I did in my head, he's, like, 25, 26.
Yeah.
You know, they never actually say I had to do some math in there. But he has never kissed a girl. It sounds like he's never even thought about kissing a girl because that literally wasn't an option in his life. Like, his life was Amanda. His life was, like, you know, helping with Amanda after, you know, their mom left, then after their dad drink himself to death. And then, you know, their aunt basically, Amanda going off to her season and being ruined. And then Guy just trying to help protect her and be there for her and being Amanda's support. And there's this beautiful moment where Philip says, like, I can't remember if it's in his head or he actually says to Guy, like, no, I think it's in his head. He realizes that that Guy has always been Amanda's support system. He's always sheltered Amanda. And Philip's like, let me be your shelter. Lean against me and let me do that for you, because you've never had someone to do that for you.
Yes.
And it's just like, oh, beautiful.
Yeah, I agree. I think that they just had like such a cool, unique relationship. And like Philip's frankness and his talk about consent in everything, just, it never felt forced, where like sometimes it feels like, you know, because consent is such a hot topic, you know, nowadays, it kind of feels like sometimes, you know, we put consent into a book almost superfluously. And I don't, superfluous is too strong of a word, but it's like, it kind of feels like it doesn't belong there, you know, even though we like that and we like reading that, and we want to see that, and we want to promote that. Sometimes it just feels disjointed, I think. And it never felt that way. Philip just felt honestly like that's who he was. And that was what was sexy to him. And that's what made it so sexy. Like,
yeah. No, absolutely. And it was so interesting because while I was reading it, I was thinking about like the classic, you know, virgin and the rake scenes in most like heterosexual romance novels. Yep. And a lot of times it's like the rake just can't stop himself. And like she says yes, but like you said, it's kind of like they put it in there so we know it's okay. Like that she wants it. But at the same time, too, it's not done in a very like, I'm going to tell you all about it way. It's still kind of it's done in a mysterious way. And then she learns about it later.
Yeah.
Or the rake feels bad because they're like, afterwards, he's like, oh my God, I've ruined this precious flower because I took her virginity. And like, how could I, you know?
Or like, I went too hard. I was too rough because I was so in love with her. But instead, this feels really like a 50-50 relationship. Like from the onset, you know, it's I'm laying my cards out on the table, as we say, and if you want to be dealt in, let me know.
Yeah, and like that's even the same thing too, because in our later encounters, like Guy even asks Philip about more, because like so far they've just done oral, and he's like, what about more? Like there is more. Do you think? And he's like, do you think I'll like more? And Philip's like, well, I was just kind of waiting to see what you wanted to do.
Yeah.
Like, some people like it, some people don't.
Yeah.
Like, let's talk about it. Let's have the discussion. Let's try it. Say stop.
Yep.
If you don't like it. Like, and I'm just like, yes.
Yes. And
how great.
And when at one point he's like describing his relationship to Guy about with John and with Corvin, how they've kind of like always slept with each other and, you know, sometimes all three of them together. And Guy is like, kind of like, I mean, again, he's never heard of anything like that before. So he's overwhelmed by it. But by the end of the book, he's like, he kind of mentions it again and like is kind of intrigued by it. And I just,
it's so cute too, because the thing is, the biggest thing that was for Philip was like, he's like, these guys, like, yes, I have a physical relationship with them that's not emotional, but like this, we've been each other's family. That's how he says it. Like, we're each other's family. And if you don't want me to sleep with them or you don't want anything to happen with them, that's okay. We can figure that out. But they need to be a part of my life.
yes.
And Guy's like, I understand they need to be a part of your life. I don't want to take them out of your life. I don't know how I fit into it, but I'm willing to see how I fit into it.
That was so good and so interesting. I loved it.
And John, Raven, and Corvin did the same thing, because at first they're like, because Corvin like has this beautiful moment with Philip where he's like, our triangle is going to be ruined. You know, it's always the three of us. And he's like, but we maybe can make a 4-sided triangle.
Yes.
Which is just like a little joke in the book.
Yeah.
But it's like so true, because he's like, we could figure out how to make it work.
Yeah, and they talk about how Raven had once been married to a woman and she wasn't willing to have them in his life, and he had retreated and his marriage hadn't worked out. And it seems like Corvin and Raven are both bisexual, it seems like.
Yes,
but
that's what it seemed like, yeah.
So, and again, some of those things are like a bit ambiguous, and like I think that's totally on purpose too by the writer, because I think she's trying to say like, guys, does it really matter? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I freaking loved it. I loved it
No,
so
love is
much.
love. And it's like, and I love it too, because it's such an open-ended relationship. It's like, Philip's like, this is how I've lived my life for so long. You've obviously never lived anything near this.
Yeah.
So like, we know that we love each other and we want to be together.
Yeah. And
so that's our foundation.
yep.
And then we will explore the options from there, and we will figure out what our life looks like with the foundation of we love each other and we want to be together.
I also just have to have a small chat about Dr. Martello and Amanda, because Amanda. Okay, first of all, that Amanda like doesn't have her own book is just a crime, except that her love story happens here. So like, I get it. But it's at one point when Dr. Martello is confessing that he is falling for Amanda, I think to Philip. You know, Philip says, well, you're a Jew and she's a Christian or a Catholic, I think. I can't remember what.
No, just a Christian.
Just a Christian. Okay. So you're a Jew and she's a Christian. Like, how would that work? Like, would you want her to convert? And he's like, no, like my faith is important to me and I would want to be able to practice it, you know, at will basically. But I wouldn't make her do that. And when she accepts his proposal, she says, like, she's basically like, yes. Okay. How do I convert?
Yeah, no, I loved that too, because like, it was so funny because that could have, and he was so open. He's like, well, I wouldn't necessarily make her convert, but like, I can't convert to Christianity. It would destroy my family.
Yeah.
Like I will remain Jewish if she's okay, like, but we could figure it out. And like, Amanda doesn't even like need the question. She's just like,
how long will it take?
Actually,
he doesn't even bring it up. Amanda brings it up.
No, she literally doesn't even let him finish the whole, like, will you marry me thing. He's like, Amanda, I have a question for you. She's like, yes. And he's like, no, I have a question for you. She's like, I understand. Yes, I will marry you. And then he's like, okay, cool. And then she's like, great. How do I convert?
Yeah. And how long is it going to take?
And how long is it going to take? Like, what do I have to do? And he's like, well, you have to do some studying. Like, and it's so great because Guy's just like, I'm for it. And, you know, but it's so great. It wasn't even a question for her. She's like, cool, I got to do this. I love you. I've already thought it through. It's fine.
I love her. And I loved just how elated she was to to live, right? Like she gets to Rookwood Hall and she's got all of these interesting people around her. I mean, she was writing these fabulously exciting stories in her head, right? And she just was waiting to live. And so now she gets this fabulous, life, and she gets to go be married to her doctor. And he didn't want her to be his nurse. He was like, no, I'll get someone more qualified. And she's like, excellent. Then she's going to get to keep writing, meeting interesting people. And it was just, I was
but
happy.
Just the whole friendship that develops, like Raven's like, oh, because he's an artist. And he's like, oh, well, has she ever had any drawing lessons? And Guy's like, yeah, the drawing master hated her because he would only he thought flowers were too suggestive. You could only paint certain flowers because long stems were too suggestive. Yes. And all she wanted to do was draw knights and dragons and fairy tales. But he was like, no, you have to draw flowers and you can only draw daisies.
Yes.
And watercolors. And Raven's like, we'll fix that. It's fine.
Yes. I mean, that's the thing is the cast of characters was so fabulous and you don't get them. And that's why yes, the beginning of the book, I think the same thing happened to me. I was having breakfast and I was reading the book and I was like, what in the and I read this passage a couple of times because it's the Sheridans. I think there's two Sheridans, or maybe I got maybe there's Street and Sheridan.
There's Street and Salcombe, but Sheridan's a first name.
Okay. So, one of them, so they're married, but one of them dresses as a man sometimes and dresses as a woman sometimes. And I was reading the first passage because Philip was asking basically if one of the couple had brought their petticoats with them so that they could basically dress as a woman and be Amanda's chaperone, but they hadn't. And I was really trying to figure out if they were a trans man or a trans woman.
So it's Mr. Street. Is the male persona, and that's how he is 99.9% of the time.
And then Mrs. Sheridan is,
it's Mrs. Salcombe because it's Mr. Salcombe and Mr. Street
and Sheridan Street. I'm sorry, too many S's.
And Sheridan Street, and so it's So
I think it's a trans.
It's a trans man, right? No. Yeah, I don't know how it goes.
Okay, you know what? Again, so I was obsessing about it because I was just trying to understand because it isn't explained to you. It's just kind of there for you to figure out. And I remember I read it out loud to my husband on the same thing. I was like, I don't know what's going on here. And then I was like, it doesn't fucking matter. Let's just keep reading. And so
they kind of explain it to you, and it's
but
you get it. But the whole point is it's there, and no one gives flying fuck about it.
They don't. And they're in a place where they can be themselves and relax. And I loved that so much. And it was just and Dr. Martello it seems like a straight cis man, but he's Jewish and he likes these people. And so I just loved this cast of characters. And so it was taking a lot of their characterizations out of the synopsis, felt like I was doing them a disservice, but I'm so glad we got to talk about them.
Yes. I know. There's so much good stuff. Cause I also feel like Amanda is such she's almost the antithesis of Guy, where she's give me more of life. And she's so open-minded and she just wants to discover things and she doesn't care. He even says Guy says she's an irreverent Christian. She really could not care about her faith.
No.
She doesn't care. She goes because she has to, and that's about it. And it's so funny because she, when Philip's oh, but Amanda was chaperoned at my house by a Mrs. Salcombe, and Guy's all confused because he never met Mrs. Salcombe. He never met a matron. He's like, what matron was at the house? And Amanda's like, I'll tell you later. It's fine. Because she and Mr. Street had a beautiful friendship and loved to hang out and chat with each other.
Yes.
And learn all about, and she wanted to know all, Guy's first reaction to fossils was that's against the Bible. And Amanda's like, tell me more.
Yeah.
Give me more. And so it's just so funny to see that dynamic. And I'm just and even Amanda's well, you love Philip. And Guy's
yeah.
I wasn't even sure how to tell you. She's but I want you to be with Philip.
Yes.
You love him and you're so happy with him and he's so happy with you and you guys need to be together. Stop worrying about me.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. I feel like we could talk about it all day. And something I just want to mention is this book is 200 pages. This is a short book. And there's so much in it. There's so much nuance and so much interesting stuff. Oh my God. But let's get into our nitty gritty details here. So we have our hero ratings. Who should we start with?
We're going to start with Philip because I have strong opinions about Philip.
Take us away.
And they're all positive. And I just I love him because I've talked about how much I love him already as far as his frankness. Mm-hmm. And his, every conversation, he's like, I'm open, I'm honest, I'm going to tell you about it. I'm transparent. I strive for transparency. I also don't give a fuck about what the ton thinks because, frankly, it's just never going to work out for me. There's too many factors against me, and I can worry about it, or I could just live my life and be happy about it.
Yep.
And he is so supportive of Guy, and he just he sees it because when Guy first comes, Philip kind of brushes him off. He's like, God, this dude. Mm-hmm. And then he kind of just sees a twinkle in the eye, or he sees a bit of a relief when he's looking at Amanda. I don't even know the moment where he saw it, but he just was like, oh, there's something more there. And I don't know what it is, but I want to open this shell a little bit more. Not even because he was sexually attracted to him yet, but just because he's like, I want to see what this dude does. He's so contained and nervous and worrier, and he just needs to, take a chill pill and relax. And also, even when Philip is being an arse, as he said, he's like, I'm sorry I was so mean and basically kicked you out and, left in a huff. And I'm just like, Philip, you're good.
Yes.
You quote unquote left in a huff.
Yeah.
It wasn't that huffy. You were frustrated by the circumstances, and Guy was basically telling you he was just going to have to leave you because he needed security over the unknowns, and he didn't want to puzzle it out because he had to make a decision in 2 minutes. And you were frustrated, and you told him your frustration, and you told him you were leaving because you couldn't obviously be there for him, and you weren't going to wait around.
Yes.
And you know what? That's okay. You were honest about it, even in your huffiness.
Yeah.
And then he still came back and he's like, I'm sorry I was huffy. And I was like, oh, Philip. Oh.
So I feel like I can guess, but what would you rate Philip?
Oh, he's a 10.
Yeah.
I love Philip. Philip's just the best.
I think Philip's great too. He didn't quite achieve perfection for me, but I think he's a 9. I'm going to give Philip a 9.
That's fine.
I don't feel like I need to repeat all the same things because that's very much how I feel. I just didn't feel that pull towards him quite so much. But
for him, it wasn't that I found him
No. I know.
It was just so refreshing. And this whole thing was just this whole book was just a beautiful conversation between equals.
Yes.
That was just open and transparent. And there was no misdirect. There was no concern.
Yeah.
Okay, tell me how you feel about Guy.
Guy was a little harder for me because, he's quieter and pensive and thinks. But then you see him kind of blossom, right? And he gets to kind of be who he wants to be, but he's learning who he wants to be. He obviously has a lot more at stake than Philip does. He has a dependence. He has a family, he has a reputation. Also it just, so for him, the stakes are higher. Also, he's just discovering what passion and love feel like, so he has so much more at stake. Regardless, he just didn't jump off the page to me so much. And although I think he's a great character, for me, he ranks a 7.
That's fair. I think that, I can also be in my own head and overthink and worry too much. And even after something's been done that I can't change, I literally can't take it back. It's done. It's over. And I'll still think about it for 2 weeks and just dwell on it and worry about it. And that really, and I don't know if that just hit me in a wrong place with Guy, because that's kind of what Guy did. But also too, I liked how Guy was willing to change his mind and was willing to be open to a conversation.
He was willing to listen and think about it.
He was willing to, exactly. And he was closed off, and he did realize that. And he was like, well, these guys aren't, he spent enough time in the murder that he was like, well, these people aren't villains. So maybe what they say isn't bad. Maybe what they say isn't necessarily good. Maybe we're just in a middle ground.
And then how do I feel about it? How do I feel about it?
And he had to figure that out. And so I was just like, I just was frustrated with Guy a lot because I knew he was having a journey. I understood that. But I felt like he just was, even towards the end, he was just a little too resistive towards the journey.
Fair enough. It was, yeah, and it's a short period of time, et cetera, et cetera. You know, you can caveat it. And I honestly don't think that there's anything she should have changed in the book. I think the fact that we kind of didn't like him is part of what makes the book dynamic. Right? And compelling, and kind of that pull between him and Philip. Like, it makes it interesting. Like, if it's too much, like, oh, everybody's so happy and great and wonderful, it's like not as exciting. Yeah. So, I mean, sometimes it can also be exciting, but I think it's harder necessarily. So yeah, just because we didn't like him doesn't, there's, it's interesting.
And I mean, for me, he's also a 7. Yeah. So, like,
still good.
But he's a 7. Philip's like, fabulous. And together their relationship is also fabulous.
Yeah, I give their relationship a 10.
Yeah, the relationship gets a 10 for sure. So like, even though Guy was like a miss for me, like,
he was less fun to read.
Yeah, he just was less fun to read, but like, I understood what was happening, and I understood the journey, and as a relationship, 10 out of 10.
Yes. So that segues us very neatly into favorite quotes, because my favorite quote has to do with their relationship. I got to share a lot of quotes in here that I just loved, that I thought were like so great with consent or with character development. But one of the things also that I didn't feel like I really conveyed in the synopsis was their relationship development and how the feelings developed. And I just really liked what Philip said here. This is when he kind of first propositions Guy, saying, you know, and I did have a quote from that, which is him saying, you know, I would really like to try this with you. But what he also says is, it's a bit long, but bear with me. I'd rather like to expand at some length on what I find irresistible about you. Are you aware how much your eyes change color in different lights? And the way you blush. Yes, exactly like that. The color sweeps across your face so readily, and it makes me wonder how responsive the rest of you might be. Your mouth, regarding which I think the less of John as an artist because he hasn't abandoned his canvas to paint it. And the fact, above all, that you're listening to me rhapsodize on your charms and you're smiling. I did say you were like your sister. Your beauty hides itself away, invisible until you decide someone is worthy of seeing it. And then you smile, and it shines.
I had that highlighted too.
Okay, I'm sorry if I stole it from you, but like,
it's fine. It's fine. I had a lot of highlights, but some of the highlights for me were like, I think I'm gonna have to give you a couple, but just because like I just loved. They weren't long and glorious, but they just like spoke to me. So the first one is, because we all know I hate misunderstandings. And Philip goes to look for Guy, and he hears him arguing with Amanda. Now he can't hear what they're saying. And this is when Guy and Amanda are arguing over who's going to take the credit for the book. Because Guy's worried that if they find out Amanda wrote the book, they're going to kick her out of the house, and there's going to be major repercussions. So here's the quote. And it was not his business, and if he stood here any longer, it would indubitably be qualified as eavesdropping. Philip made himself step away into his study, where he drank his tea in a worried frame of mind.
I know, it's so good.
Look at this man not causing misunderstandings because he's at a door, there's arguing, and instead of trying to listen in, he's like, nope, that's a private conversation. I should take myself elsewhere, and I will come back to this later.
Love it. Oh, I know.
Love that.
So good.
And then the other one's at the end where Philip comes back from London and like he has arrived to save the day in the sense that he gives Amanda the letter and brings Dr. Martello. But this is when they're out in the garden talking, and Philip says, when you're afraid, you hide. But when I'm afraid, I hid out. And that is precisely what I did then. Corvin assures me I am utterly intolerable when in love. Guy tried to smile. It wobbled a little. He's wrong. Yes, well, you tell him that, Philip said. He and John have taken turns shouting at me for 4 solid days. The words, best thing that ever happened to you, have only been exceeded in use by stupid prick.
I love it so much. So I actually wanted to talk a little bit about the writing in general. How did you find the writing, the style, the prose of this book? Because this is the first KJ Charles I've ever read.
Yes. And so for me, when I first started reading it, and granted, once again, I was in the chaos stream and I was very confused. And it felt a little, it didn't feel as like sophisticated as I'm used to when I read like a Julia Quinn or like a Tessa Dare or a Lorraine Heath, you know, like I kind of get used to this like writing that kind of sucks me in. So initially I was in chaos and I was battered around a bit. And then I kind of came in and I thought it was just like Philip. I thought it was all very frank. Like there was good vocabulary. There was good use of it. It didn't feel like it wasn't a sweep me away and I got lost in a prose, but it was like very frank and matter of fact. And maybe that's why it was so short, because it was just like, I'm going to explain the story to you. And it did take me away in the end, and I did enjoy it thoroughly. And in the end, it just was like a little more simplified, but I didn't find that against it. Like I enjoyed it within the story.
See, I think it was very sophisticated. I really liked her prose. I think that she's really interesting because it's not necessarily the same cadence as a Julia Quinn or a Tessa Dare. But I just really think that her dialogue is snappy and witty, and I love it.
I loved, like, the dialogue for me was like 10 stars.
Yeah.
And like, that's the thing is, and maybe they're right. Maybe the cadence was what was off for me. Maybe it wasn't the sophistication. Maybe it was the cadence.
Yeah.
I'm not always great with figuring out what that is.
Well, and I mean, what is cadence like when you talk about a book? But I feel like, you know, if you've done any music in your life, like you kind of get the feeling, right? Which is like just when you walk into the book, like you know what's going on. And I get that because we talked about, I just read that Julia Quinn, and literally from page 2, I was laughing out loud. I knew who character A was. I was so into it, but it was so simplistic of a story compared to this one. And I think that the sophistication of this story is really fresh and interesting and was such a cool read. So I think we're both saying we liked her writing.
Yes. And exactly. And I think it's like you said, like, it was a very like complicated story, but that's, I think, why for me it felt a little more like it was a complicated story, but she made it in a way that in the end, like, it was like easy for me to read.
Yeah.
And I could keep up with it.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't so overly complicated and she wasn't throwing things at me. Like, I did have things, like, I was battered around a bit at the beginning, but then, you know, I finally found the rhythm.
Yeah.
Yes, because in the end, it was very much like you get snappy dialogue, you get honest discussions. Every discussion moves the plot along, and I was like, "Oh yeah,
and all that investment with the characters in the beginning, like that's kind of what adds to the richness of the book. Because really, this book had less tropes than most of the books we read. It really had. I mean, at first, I really only wrote enemies to lovers. And then I was like, all right, well, we have a lot of the virgin and the rake, right? You know, like, I was like, oh, virgin hero. And I was like, yeah, that's not really what it's about. That's not like what this story is about. That's not the trope we're going for. And it didn't feel tropey in that respect. But it was, you know, someone who's never had sex and someone who's had a lot of sex, you know, sexual experience. Yeah. So I don't know. I just thought it was interesting. But
yeah,
shall we talk about steaminess?
Oh, God, let's talk about that.
Take us away.
God, it was like you blew on it a few times. You took a sip. You maybe had to blow on it again. Like, it was good. And it was so interesting because it was like, it was steamy because it built. Because it was like, I'm explaining it. Like, I want you to feel it. You're going to tell me if it feels good. Do you want me to stop? No. Okay. Well, now you have to tell me what you want. Because I'm not a mind reader and I want you to be comfortable with everything. And so you're going to tell me what you want. And,
we also love the, like, you know, butterfly emerging from the cocoon, right? And that was Guy's journey, his sexual, you know, awakening, right? So you start to see him start to become more comfortable with sex and also like be a little bit more daring and start to voice the things that he's interested in. And it was so, I mean, that's what makes it steamy too. So yeah, no, I agree. And our encounter counter was 5. So kind of up there. I mean, it might've been 5.5 because like parts were mentioned, but it wasn't like, I don't know. It just didn't quite count.
There was more allusion to it, but we had like 5 solids.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. So now let's talk about our feminist / shall we say inclusivity recap.
Oh, support.
I feel like we've already talked about this with this cast of characters with, you have everybody, every sexual orientation, every gender orientation, not every, but you have such a diverse range of sexual orientation, gender orientation, like these religious orientation, these wild, crazy liberal beliefs of like women's rights and things. Mm-hmm. Also, you just like feminism, like Amanda. We love Amanda. So like Amanda's great.
Oh yeah. Oh, and like Philip's main thing is like John Raven, was taken, they don't even know where he's from because he was taken as a boy to be a page boy when that was stylish, for England, when England still had slaves, and like his whole mission is he wants to get into sugar beet, and processing sugar from sugar beets because he wants to like eliminate part of that sugar trade. He wants to lessen the dependence on it.
Yes.
Because he wants to like not have slavery be a thing. And I'm just like, yeah, get it, dude. You have a moral like goal that also is profitable potentially.
Yes. And I also felt bad about leaving the whole sugar beet storyline out of the synopsis. But again,
you know what? It's okay. We're working on it, Zoe. We're trying. Yeah. We're trying new things, Zoe. It's scary and it's hard, but we're trying new things.
So true. So yeah, this book is like, it's just so inclusive and so feminist, and like I feel like we already talked about all the pieces that are, so I don't want to like repeat them. I want to go to our final book rating.
I thoroughly love this book. I'm going to give it a 9.5.
I'm going to give this book a 9. I also thoroughly love this book. When I started reading it, I really was like, yeah, this is going to be 7, and then like,
yeah, same. I like didn't have high hopes, but man, my love of Philip, like,
and not
Phillip, he's my dream man.
I love what
I don't even like blonde haired guys, but he's my dream man.
I just love what she did with this book, right? Like it's such a like masterpiece of interest. I
love it. But I loved that, like, even when they were unsure, even when Corvin's like, don't touch that, and John's like, don't mess with it, and then he does mess with it, and they're like, okay, but now what are you going to do? Like, we support you no matter what. And then Corvin's like, but you love him, bro. Yeah. And he's like, damn, you're right, I do love him. Okay, cool, I love him now. That's what's happening. And then Corvin's like, you came back. Corvin and John are like, you came to London without him? What is wrong with you?
Yes. It's that, and like, also, I loved the relationship in this book, but I loved the rest of this book. And the fact that I started off reading the book and was like, what is going on? I'm so confused. Meh, meh, meh. And then when I come away from this book, some of the things I remember the most are the supplementary characters and Dark Down and like all of the other subplots that come around in this book. That is such a strong thing. I just read another new release. I'm not going to talk about which one it is, but it hasn't come out yet. And so I read an advanced copy of it, and there is a lot of that where there's just a lot of sub-characters that kind of are talking around a lot. And I found it so boring and so superfluous. And I was just like so not into that. And honestly, like in this book, I never thought there was a scene that wasn't needed. So
no, it flowed so nicely. Everything went together. Like even you had to get a lot of background, but the background was like put into the plot so that way it was still carrying the plot forward. It wasn't like, pause plot, we need to give you this information. It was like, I'm going to explain this information while you and I are getting closer, so that way you have some background on me and I have some background on you.
It's so good, yeah. So yeah, I think this book is a 9, and I think it's a fabulous book.
Fabulous.
And I'm so glad we read it. And honestly,
I am too.
Let's be real. We would not have read this book before we started this podcast.
No, I never would have picked it up.
Shame on us.
I would have read KJ Charles eventually because
your book club. I get it.
My book club. And actually it's really funny because we ended up with this book because Zoe's like, we should read a KJ Charles. And I was like, I'm supposed to read a KJ Charles book.
Yes, but we ended up like, I ended
up reading a different one. Yeah. So that's 2 KJ Charles books in 1 month.
Ooh, well, lucky you.
Lucky me.
So, speaking of reading, terrible segue there, but
That's okay.
Next week, again, we wanted to remind you that we are chatting with Scarlett Peckham about the Raycast. So,
yes,
in 7 days from today, we will be back to talk about the Raycast and all of its glory. And so we really hope you join us. So go out there, grab yourself a copy of the Raycast. Also, head on over to bit.ly/strumpetsubscribe to enter to win a signed copy and some other goodies straight from Scarlett herself if you're a U.S. resident. And, of course, be part of our email list.
Yes, fun stuff.
So, again, thank you all for listening. And join us next time for our interview with Scarlett Peckham.
And may all your ever afters end happily.
Tea and Strumpets is part of the Frolic Podcast Network. Find more podcasts you'll love at frolic.media/podcasts. Hi, and welcome to Tea and Strumpets, a Regency romance review. I'm going to say that again because my husband was yelling at the dog. Okay.